Time stops differently when you are watching death approach. For Kai Rivers, it froze at exactly 6:42 a.m. when the desperate roar shattered the howling storm. 10 years of remote rescue operations, following 3 tours as a combat medic in Afghanistan, had taught him to read the language of survival. He knew the sound of a life hanging by a thread in any language. But this was different. This was not human. Through sheets of stinging rain, he spotted it. A massive Kodiak bear, over 1,500 pounds of raw power, now helpless against nature's fury. Each thunderous wave crashed against its enormous body, dragging it further from the rocky shoreline of Alaska's most treacherous cove. The bear's eyes, wild with panic, locked onto his. In that moment, Kai felt something ancient stir in his blood, an echo of the stories his Alutiiq grandmother whispered about a time when his people and these great beings shared more than just territory. The logical part of his brain screamed every rescue protocol he had ever learned. Never approach wild animals, never intervene in nature's course, never risk human life for wildlife. But logic felt distant now, drowned out by the bear's weakening cries and the pounding of his own heart. He had seen that same look before, in the eyes of wounded soldiers, that primal struggle between life and death. In Afghanistan, he had sworn an oath to preserve life, never thinking it would extend to a moment like this. What he did next would violate every rule in the rescue handbook. His combat medical training told him he had minutes, maybe less, before hypothermia would claim this magnificent creature. The wind whipped his face as memories of battlefield decisions flooded back. Split-second choices between life and death. But what he discovered in the next few moments would shake the foundation of everything humans thought they knew about these apex predators, and everything Kai thought he knew about healing. 3 years ago, Kai had traded the battlefields of Afghanistan for these rugged Alaskan shores. As a combat medic with the 10th Mountain Division, he had saved countless lives under the scorching desert sun. But each life saved came with a cost, etched deep into his soul. The nightmares followed him home, turning every sudden noise into an incoming mortar, every flash of light into exploding shrapnel. The transition to civilian life had felt impossible at first. The sterile halls of city hospitals only amplified his unease. Too many lights, too many sounds. Too many people who could never understand what it meant to make life or death decisions while bullets traced patterns in the air around you. His Alutiiq grandmother saw the war still raging behind his eyes and spoke of the healing powers of their ancestral lands. That was how Kai found himself in Alaska's remote wilderness, where his grandmother's people had lived for generations. The position of remote rescue specialist seemed made for someone with his unique combination of skills. The vast emptiness spoke to something deep within him. Here, among the towering cliffs and fierce storms, the hypervigilance that marked him as a wounded warrior became a tool for survival. His first year was the hardest. The isolation forced him to confront the shadows that had followed him from Afghanistan. But slowly, the rhythm of nature began to heal what combat had broken. Each successful rescue mission, whether it was stranded fishermen or lost hikers, helped rebuild the pieces of himself that war had shattered. The local search and rescue team valued his military medical training. Kai's experience treating trauma under extreme conditions proved invaluable in the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. He learned to combine modern rescue techniques with the traditional knowledge passed down through his grandmother's stories. The old ways taught him to read the weather in the way seabirds flew, to understand the tides by watching the seals, to know the land as his ancestors had known it. Now standing on this storm-lashed shore, watching a massive bear fight for survival, Kai realized that every moment of his life had been preparing him for this decision. His military training had taught him to act decisively in impossible situations. His ancestral knowledge warned him of the delicate balance between respect and intervention. The question was, which path would he choose? The storm had been building since midnight, turning the Alaskan coast into a battlefield of wind and water. Weather like this always put Kai on edge. Experience told him these were the conditions when things went wrong, when the sea claimed its tributes from those who underestimated its power. The call came in at 5:30 a.m. A local fishing boat had not returned to harbor. 3 men aboard, last radio contact reported engine troubles near Thunder Point. Standard procedure would have meant waiting for the Coast Guard helicopter, but the storm had grounded all air support. The fisherman had an hour of survival time in these waters, maybe less. Kai moved through his equipment check with practiced precision. Each item in his rescue kit had earned its place through hard lessons learned. Thermal dry suit, rated for the freezing Alaskan waters. Emergency medical supplies, packed in waterproof containers. Rescue rope, carabiners, and flotation devices. The ritual of preparation centered him, pushing away the lingering shadows of his latest nightmare. The dashboard clock read 6:15 a.m. when he guided his rescue vessel out of the harbor. The sea rose in great, heavy swells, waves breaking over the bow as he fought to maintain course. The wind carried the taste of ice, reminding him of his grandmother's warning the night before. "The spirits are restless," she had said, studying the clouds gathering on the horizon. "The old ones are stirring." His search pattern would take him along the coastline where the fishing boat was last reported. Thunder Point was notorious for its treacherous currents, where the warmer southern waters collided with the Arctic flow. The locals called it the Sea Wolf's Mouth, for the way it seemed to swallow boats whole. The first light of dawn revealed a world turned savage. Visibility dropped to mere yards as rain swept across the water in horizontal sheets. Kai adjusted his course, letting his instincts guide him as much as his instruments. His grandmother had taught him to read the water's mood, to feel the subtle changes that might lead him to those in need. He was scanning the shoreline for any sign of the missing boat when that desperate roar cut through the storm. 6:42 a.m. The moment that would change everything. The moment when his morning of search and rescue would become something else entirely, something that would challenge every protocol he had ever learned. The bear's massive form appeared and disappeared in the waves, a dark shape against the churning gray water. Kai's military training kicked in automatically, his mind categorizing details with clinical precision. Adult Kodiak bear, likely female based on size and structure, approximately 1,500 pounds, currently caught in a current moving at roughly 8 knots. Core body temperature dropping rapidly in the near-freezing water. Time was the enemy here, just as it had been in combat. Hypothermia would set in within minutes in these conditions, even for a creature this size. The bear's movements were already showing signs of fatigue, its powerful strokes becoming erratic. Each wave pushed it further from the rocky shoreline, toward the deeper waters where rescue would become impossible. Kai's eyes tracked the current patterns, the same way he used to scan terrain for safe extraction routes. The water was forming a deadly funnel, pulling everything toward a section of submerged rocks. If the bear hit those rocks at this speed, the impact would be fatal. He estimated 3 minutes, maybe 4, before that became inevitable. His assessment expanded to include the risks. The water temperature was hovering around 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time without thermal protection, 15 minutes maximum. With his dry suit, 45 minutes before physical capabilities would be severely compromised. The current would test the limits of his strength, but his rescue vessel could provide an extraction point if positioned correctly. But there were other dangers. A panicked Kodiak bear was one of the most lethal forces in nature. In the water, its normal behavioral patterns would be unpredictable. One swipe from those massive paws could shatter bones. If the bear tried to climb onto him for safety, its weight would drag them both under. His combat medical training screamed about the risks of compound fractures, crush injuries, and drowning. Through the rain, Kai noticed something else. The bear's eyes kept darting toward a point on the shore, showing unusual focus despite its panic. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory, speaking of how bears never forgot their young. The realization hit him hard. This might not be just about saving one life. The tactical part of his brain calculated angles and options. His rescue vessel could provide a stable platform, but maneuvering it close enough in these conditions would be nearly impossible. Swimming out with a rescue line was possible, but the cross-current would make it a one-way journey. There would be no second attempts. A particularly large wave crashed over the bear, submerging it completely. When it resurfaced, its movements were noticeably weaker. The cold was winning. Kai felt the familiar weight of a life-or-death decision settling onto his shoulders. In Afghanistan, these moments had come with gunfire and explosions. Here it came with the roar of wind and waves and the increasingly desperate sounds of a creature fighting for survival. His hands moved over his rescue gear, checking each piece one final time. Every piece of equipment had to work perfectly. Every decision had to be right, because out here, just like in combat, there were no second chances. In combat, Kai had learned that the hardest decisions came in the moments between heartbeats. Standing on his rescue vessel's deck, watching the bear's struggle weaken, he felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced in Afghanistan when a wounded soldier lay in the open under enemy fire. The memory crashed over him like the waves battering the shore. Private Martinez caught in open ground, bleeding out. Every protocol had said to wait for air support. Every rule demanded they hold position. But rules did not stop blood from flowing, did not keep hearts beating. Kai had crawled out under the gunfire that day, breaking every regulation to save a life. Martinez had made it home to his family. Now the bear's eyes found his again through the storm. There was something in that gaze that transcended the barrier between species, the same raw will to live he had seen in countless human eyes. His grandmother's words surfaced in his mind. When the spirits put a life in your path, there are no accidents. The logical arguments against intervention stacked up like the waves themselves. Risk of death by hypothermia, risk of injury from the panicked animal, risk of disciplinary action for violating rescue protocols. His training offered clear instructions. Human life comes first, always. But time was solidifying into a physical weight. The bear's head barely cleared the water now. Its movements had become sluggish, the cold stealing strength with every passing second. If he was going to act, it had to be now. The next wave might be the one that sent this magnificent creature to the bottom. Kai's hand touched the rescue rope, feeling its rough texture through his gloves. The same rope that had pulled countless humans to safety. His dry suit was rated for these waters, but only for limited exposure. The current would give him one chance to reach the bear, one chance to attempt something no one had ever tried. The memory of Martinez flashed again, the relief in the young soldier's eyes when Kai reached him, the way his fingers had gripped Kai's uniform, holding on to life itself. Sometimes protocol had to bow to something deeper, something that spoke from the heart of what it meant to be a healer. His decision crystallized with the clarity that only came in life or death moments. The bear was not just an animal in distress, it was a life within his reach. And Kai Rivers had not survived war, had not carried the weight of his ancestors' wisdom, had not battled his own demons, to stand by and watch death claim victory without a fight. With practiced movements, he began securing his rescue line. The next few minutes would either write a new chapter in rescue history or add his name to Alaska's long list of souls claimed by the sea. Years of military precision guided Kai's hands as he prepared for the rescue. Each movement was deliberate, each second precious. He had done this countless times before, but never for this kind of survivor. The dry suit sealed tight against his body, protecting against the freezing embrace that awaited him. First, the primary rescue line, tested to hold 2,000 pounds. He secured one end to the boat's rescue winch, wrapping the other end around his waist in a modified version of his combat harness. The bear's weight would make standard rescue holds impossible. He would need to improvise. Next came the backup measures, a second line with a quick release mechanism in case the primary failed. The emergency flotation device, modified for extreme weight support. His waterproof radio, though he knew in these conditions any call for help would be futile. Each piece of equipment represented a thin line between success and disaster. Kai positioned his rescue vessel carefully, accounting for the current's pull and the wind's fury. The boat needed to stay stable enough to serve as an extraction point, but close enough to give him a fighting chance at reaching the bear. He dropped the sea anchor, letting it bite deep into the churning waters below. His mind ran through the scenarios, the same way he had planned medical evacuations under fire. If the bear panicked, he would need to maintain distance while still providing support. If the current proved too strong, he had mapped 3 different return routes. If his primary rescue line failed, he had precious seconds to activate the backup. The final step was one his grandmother had taught him, a moment of stillness before the storm. He closed his eyes, feeling the rain on his face, letting the sounds of wind and waves fill his consciousness. In this moment, he was not just a rescuer. He was a bridge between worlds, between the military precision that had kept him alive in war and the ancient wisdom that had brought him home. Opening his eyes, Kai saw the bear still fighting, but barely. Its massive head rose and fell with each wave, each emergence shorter than the last. The time for preparation was over. Now came the moment of truth, where all his training, experience, and instincts would be tested against nature's raw power. The water hit Kai like 1,000 frozen needles, even through his dry suit. His combat training took over, controlling his breathing against the shock. The current immediately grabbed him, stronger than he had anticipated, pulling him into its deadly dance. Each stroke had to be measured, each movement precise. One mistake would end more than just the rescue. 20 yards separated him from the bear. The distance seemed to stretch impossibly as waves rose between them like liquid mountains. Kai fought against the cross-current, his muscles burning with effort. In Afghanistan, he had carried wounded men through gunfire. Now nature itself was the enemy, trying to claim both rescuer and victim. The bear's massive form grew closer. 15 yards. Its movements had become desperately slow, each struggle to stay above water weaker than the last. Kai could see its eyes now, wide with a primal fear that transcended species. 10 yards. The current slammed him sideways, nearly ripping his rescue line taut. He corrected, remembering his grandmother's words about reading the water's rhythm. 5 yards. The bear saw him now. Its panic surged visibly, sending it into a final burst of desperate energy. Powerful paws churned the water, creating a dangerous vortex around its massive body. Kai had expected this. Fear made every creature unpredictable. He held his position, letting the animal register his presence while keeping a crucial distance. 3 yards. The critical moment arrived. The bear's strength was failing completely, its head barely clearing the water. Kai watched its eyes, remembering how he used to approach wounded soldiers. Slow movements, steady presence, letting them know help had arrived. The massive creature stilled slightly, as if sensing his intent. 2 yards. A massive wave rose behind them. Kai had seconds to act. He surged forward, his hands finding purchase in the thick fur. The bear did not fight him. Perhaps it had no strength left, or perhaps it understood this was its last chance. Its weight was staggering, trying to drag them both under. Kai's muscles screamed as he maneuvered the rescue line, securing it around the bear's torso. 1 yard from death. The waves struck. Water crashed over them both. In that moment, submerged in the freezing darkness, Kai felt the bear's heart beating against his hands. The same desperate rhythm he had felt in countless human patients. The same fight for life. They surfaced together, Kai signaling frantically to activate the rescue winch. The line drew tight. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The bear's weight and the current's pull created a deadly equation. Kai kicked hard, supporting the animal's head above water, his own strength adding to the mechanical pull. Slowly, agonizingly, they began moving toward the boat. Each foot gained was a battle. The bear remained surprisingly calm, as if understanding its survival depended on this strange partnership. Its eyes stayed fixed on Kai, showing something he had never seen in an animal before. Recognition. When they finally reached the boat's side, Kai faced the most dangerous moment. A panicked bear could still kill him with a single swipe, but as they hung there in the churning water, something extraordinary happened. The massive creature remained still, allowing him to secure additional lines. It was almost as if it was cooperating. With a final surge of strength, Kai activated the full winch system. The bear rose from the water like some ancient sea god, water cascading from its dense fur. Only when it was safely on the boat's reinforced rescue platform did Kai allow himself to feel the full weight of what he had just accomplished. As Kai pulled himself back onto the boat, his combat medic instincts took over. The bear lay on its side, breathing heavily on the rescue platform. Something about its labored breathing pattern caught his attention. It was not just exhaustion from the near drowning. There was another rhythm beneath it, one he had encountered before in emergency medical situations. Moving cautiously, he approached the massive creature. The bear's eyes followed him, but without aggression. Instead, there was an almost pleading quality in its gaze. His grandmother had always said animals knew when someone was trying to help them. Now as he drew closer, he understood why the bear had been so desperate to survive. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The bear was pregnant, very pregnant. The signs were there in the swollen abdomen, the particular way she held herself. His medical training kicked into high gear. The stress of the rescue, the cold water, the physical trauma, all of it could trigger premature labor. They were an hour from the nearest shore, and the storm was only getting worse. Kai's mind raced through his options. His emergency medical kit was designed for humans, but some of the principles would be the same. He needed to prevent shock, maintain body temperature, and monitor for signs of distress. But a laboring Kodiak bear was not covered in any rescue manual he had ever studied. The bear made a sound unlike anything he had heard before, a mix between a growl and a whimper. Her massive body tensed, and Kai saw the first signs of active labor. The cold water had accelerated everything. This was not just a rescue anymore. It was about to become something unprecedented. His radio crackled to life. Through the static, he caught fragments of the Coast Guard's response to his earlier call about the missing fishermen. They had been found safe in a sheltered cove. But the message also brought news that the storm was intensifying. They had perhaps 30 minutes before it would become impossible to navigate the waters. Kai looked at the bear, seeing the same trust in her eyes that he had seen in the water. His grandmother's stories came back to him, tales of a time when their people and the great bears shared a deeper connection. She had always told him that such moments might come again, when the old boundaries between human and animal would blur. Time was now moving with desperate speed. Each contraction brought them closer to a moment that would challenge everything Kai knew about rescue work, about wildlife, about the limits of trust between species. He began gathering supplies, knowing he was about to attempt something that had never been documented in rescue history. The bear watched him prepare, her massive body shuddering with another contraction. In her eyes, Kai saw something that transcended the natural order. It was the same look he had seen in wounded soldiers who placed their lives in his hands, a mix of fear and absolute trust. Another contraction came, stronger this time. Kai took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was to come. He had thought the rescue was the hard part. Now he realized it had only been the beginning. What happened next would be documented in wildlife journals and rescue manuals for years to come. The bear's first cub arrived as waves crashed against the boat, testing every bit of Kai's medical training. His hands, steady from years of combat medicine, moved with careful precision. The tiny creature emerged into the storm, smaller than he had expected, perfectly formed and fighting for its first breath. But something was wrong. The cub was not moving. Without hesitation, Kai did what he had done countless times on the battlefield, clearing airways and stimulating breathing. His combat experience had taught him that life and death often hinged on seconds. The mother bear watched, completely still, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. Then came the cry, a sound that cut through the storm's fury. The cub took its first breath, strong and clear. The mother bear made a soft sound, almost like a purr, her eyes never leaving Kai. But there was no time to celebrate. Her body tensed again, and Kai realized this was not over. The second cub arrived faster, but larger than its sibling. This time Kai was ready. His hands moved with confident familiarity, supporting the new life as it entered the world. The mother bear remained extraordinarily calm, defying everything known about wildlife behavior. It was as if some ancient understanding had been awakened between human and bear. Then came the moment that would change everything. As Kai worked to ensure the second cub's safety, the mother bear did something unprecedented. She gently nudged her first cub toward him, a gesture of absolute trust that defied natural law. In that moment, all his grandmother's stories about the sacred connection between their people and these magnificent creatures suddenly felt less like legends and more like forgotten truths. Working quickly, Kai used his thermal emergency blankets to create a warm space for the cubs. His combat medical training had taught him about preserving body heat, about the critical first moments of life. But this was different. This was not just about medical procedures. This was about being part of something profound, something that transcended the usual boundaries between human and wild. The storm continued to rage, but inside their small sanctuary, something extraordinary had taken place. Two healthy cubs, against all odds, drew their first breaths under the watchful eyes of both their mother and an unlikely human guardian. The mother bear's eyes met Kai's, and in that gaze was something he had seen before, in the eyes of soldiers he had saved, a recognition of life preserved, of trust honored. In the distance, Kai could hear the Coast Guard helicopter approaching, drawn by his emergency signal. Soon, wildlife experts would arrive, amazed by what they found. But for now, in this moment between moments, he simply sat with his unlikely family, understanding that his life would never be quite the same. The news spread through Alaska's wildlife community like wildfire. By sunset, the small harbor was crowded with researchers, wildlife officials, and local media. Everyone wanted to witness what many were already calling a miracle. But Kai remained on his boat, watching over his unlikely charges until proper transport arrived. The mother bear and her cubs were carefully moved to a nearby wildlife rehabilitation center, but not before something remarkable happened. As the transfer began, the mother bear refused to move until Kai approached. The wildlife expert stood in stunned silence as she gently touched her nose to his hand, a gesture of trust so profound it brought tears to the eyes of even the most hardened observers. The local Alutiiq elders arrived at the center that evening. Kai's grandmother stood among them, her weathered face bearing a knowing smile. "The old stories," she said, touching his shoulder, "they are not just stories." The elders spoke of ancient bonds between their people and the great bears, of connections lost to time, but not forgotten. What Kai had done, they said, was more than a rescue. It was a reawakening. Over the next few days, Kai found himself drawn to the rehabilitation center. The mother bear recognized his presence each time, maintaining a calm demeanor that baffled wildlife experts. The cubs grew stronger by the day, their survival defying the odds. Researchers noted something unprecedented. The mother bear was allowing Kai to approach during medical checks, a behavior that challenged everything known about wild bear interactions. His combat medic experience took on new meaning as he worked with the wildlife veterinarians, sharing his observations and insights. The techniques he had used during the cub's birth were being documented, studied, and already incorporated into wildlife rescue protocols. But more than that, his experience was challenging fundamental assumptions about the relationship between humans and wild animals. The story touched something deep in people's hearts. Local fishermen began reporting bear sightings differently, with more respect and less fear. Children at the cultural center asked to hear the story again and again. Something was shifting in the community's relationship with the wilderness they shared. 1 year later, Kai stood at the observation point near Thunder Cove, watching a familiar shape move through the morning mist. The mother bear and her cubs, now strong and healthy, had been successfully released back into the wild. Yet they remained in the area, occasionally visible from safe distances, a living testament to that extraordinary day. The experience had transformed Kai's life in unexpected ways. His nightmares of combat had been replaced by dreams of stormy waters and saving lives. The hypervigilance that once haunted him now served a new purpose as he helped develop protocols for wildlife rescue operations. The Alaska Wildlife Service had created a new position for him, bridging the gap between traditional rescue operations and wildlife response. His grandmother's stories had taken on new meaning in the community. Young people sought him out, eager to learn both modern rescue techniques and ancient wisdom. The incident had sparked a revival of cultural practices focused on wildlife conservation, blending old knowledge with new understanding. The most profound change was within himself. The weight of war that had burdened his soul had lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose he had never known. In saving that bear and her cubs, he had found his own healing. Each time he saw them in the distance, each time he trained new rescue workers, he was reminded that sometimes the greatest transformations come not from running from our past, but from finding new ways to carry it forward. For more incredible stories of extraordinary moments in the wild, moments where courage meets compassion and lives are forever changed, subscribe to our channel. Join our community of wildlife enthusiasts and be part of these amazing journeys of discovery. Every day, we bring you remarkable tales of human-animal connections that remind us of our shared world. Hit that subscribe button and never miss another story that touches both heart and soul. Turn on notifications to be first to witness these extraordinary encounters.